Hi guys, it's Beanie Eastham and welcome back to B Show. Today I have with me is Avery Bryanton. She is a pre-law student who worked her way up from being an intern with a law firm to being a part-time employee. So tell us a little bit about how you kind of got that job and started off as an intern and then worked your way up.
So back in the spring, I worked with the Career Center to develop a resume and apply for spring and summer positions because I knew that I wanted to work this summer and make some money for myself. So I applied to Holbrook and they responded very promptly, and I went in for an interview, and then I started about 2 weeks later in March, and I interned there all summer, and they recently told me that I was no longer going to be an intern, that I was going to be a part-time employee working with our team. So
And you said it was Holbrook?
Holbrook and Holbrook.
Holbrook. What's their type of law that they go for?
So they're a real estate law office. They mainly work in title, which is basically closing real estate transactions. So whenever people want to close on their homes, their real estate agents come to us with the deal, and we do title searches, and we basically look for any liens on the property that could prohibit the buyers or sellers from closing that deal. So we're kind of the third party in the whole transaction process.
And when you finally go to law school and graduate, is that the type of law you're wanting to go into?
I want to stay on the civil side.
The civil side?
I am not currently looking to go into criminal law, but I am thinking more on the business side. So I'm thinking corporate law as of now.
And what kind of cases would those cover, I guess?
So we would basically represent businesses, business owners. In law, everyone says everyone needs a lawyer, even lawyers need lawyers. So we would help like big corporations in their deals with other corporations, and a lot of contracts and business plan management.
So how, kind of like med school and law school, how do you like number it down to like the ones that you really know you want to go to that would be the best for you?
The schools?
Mm-hmm.
So it's really going to depend on your GPA and LSAT scores. Those are the two things that law schools really look at. So you have a bunch of tiers of law schools, the top being like the T14, which is the most prestigious, like Harvard and Yale, Stanford. But you want your GPA to be as high as possible, and you want your LSAT score to be as high as possible, and that really dictates where you can apply and where you get into. And they like to include your job experience, but you can kind of figure out what tier you're in from those two statistics.
And how is the LSAT graded? Because I know you don't have to take it for a while, right? For like the real deal?
I'll take my first real one in June.
The first one, and you've been practicing for how many months now?
Like 2 months.
2 months.
Now, so it's about a year. They say that you want to take to study for it.
And break that test down for us, because I personally don't know like what goes into it and like the time limits and like the questions. So what is it kind of like?
So the difference between the LSAT is a standardized test that is completely different from any other standardized test. So like a lot of people are familiar with like the ACT or the SAT, and that is kind of testing you on what you've learned throughout high school. The MCAT for medical school tests you on what you learn in your college level medical courses. The LSAT does not do that. It is a completely logical test. It's all logic. So anything you see on the LSAT is nothing that you've really seen before in your day-to-day life. That's why it takes so long to study for it, because you basically have to learn how to take the test. It's broken down into 3 sections, 3 main sections. You have a reading comprehension, which is a lot like the SAT. So you read a passage and then you answer questions on it. You have logical reasoning, which has different series, but you read a passage and you answer a question on it. And those are a bit difficult because you have like different questions, like strengthening and weakening questions. What weakens this argument versus what out of these options would strengthen this person's argument? And there's a whole spectrum of those. And then logic games, which are a series of logical puzzles that they give you some like clues or like rules that you have to follow to answer the certain questions from within the puzzles. So it doesn't really have to do with law at all. It's more so, can you think logically under pressure? And it's all time.
So the whole timing of the test, what does that come out to? Not including the sections, how long would it take for like a person to complete the LSAT?
So it'll be 4 sections that are 35 minutes each. So it's around like
2.5 hours ish.
2.5 hours.
Okay, and like no breaks, straight through.
You do get some breaks in between sections, but yeah, you're sitting there either in a classroom or now they're doing remote with a proctor on your computer. But it's a long time that you have to sit there, and I think in prep, that's the hardest part. It's not only a mentally exhausting test, it's also physically exhausting because you're sitting in the same spot for hours at a time. And
I feel like everybody can relate. Those standardized tests in high school, nobody liked those.
Yeah,
I hated sitting there for like 3 hours just like looking at it, like having a 15-minute break. It's awful. And then like when you're taking one that like important to your career, I bet like that's a lot of stress, isn't it?
Yeah, and in prep, you want to take as many practice tests as you can because that's how you get really good at it and that's how you get your timing down. And it's physically exhausting to sit through that.
What does Bellarmine have for like LSAT prep? Do they have anything? Okay.
So they just started a course this year. I'm in like the first ever course with Dr. David Scott, who's a Harvard law grad. He works in the philosophy department, and he has just created a class that's partnered with 7Sage, which is a very like prestigious LSAT prep course that you can take. So we've gotten access to all of the past LSATs, the whole online experience through 7Sage, and also weekly 3-hour classes with Dr. Scott.
It's neat that Bellarmine has like somebody from Harvard Law. It always reminds me of like Legally Blonde.
Yeah.
Like I love that. But so with the score, what is the scores that get you into like Harvard and the Ivies?
So it all depends. I mean, the way it's graded, I'm pretty sure it ranges from 120 to 180, 180 being the highest. It's also graded on a curve, so the way the questions are answered is everyone who's taking that month's LSAT, you like say you get a question wrong that like a high percentage of LSAT test takers got right, it's gonna affect your score more because it's graded on a curve.
Okay.
So that's the other part of it. High scores, usually T14s want as close to 180 as possible. So high 170s, 180, and that's very challenging, along with almost a perfect GPA. But you can still get into really, really great law schools with not as great scores as that. So it's all relative to you and who you are.
Yeah, and what kind of like area, I guess, in the country are you kind of like considering for law school? Because I know like Ohio has a good one, and then but there's always like the Connecticut where you're from. There's a lot over there. So what are you kind of like thinking that your top 3 schools are?
So a lot goes into that, and it's a really big decision because usually where people attend law school is where they're going to practice for at least the first 5 years, where they're going to take the bar exam. So it's all relative. So, you know, you have to think of like where you can see yourself living for a first big chunk of your life. I love Louisville, so I'm definitely looking at U of L and UK and some surrounding ones like Ohio State. But I am also looking at some Boston schools. It is a little challenging because the cost of living on the East Coast is so high that it would be me paying for law school and paying for food and not having much money to do much of anything else on top of paying for rent. So, it's a lot to think about, but I do have some time.
Yeah, and that's good. And since we're coming close to our time here, do you have any words of advice or wisdom to anybody, like a freshman at Bellarmine who's like thinking they want to go into law?
For any freshmen, definitely if you're thinking about law school, focus on your GPA. That's really the majority of what you can do. Research some schools in some areas of law that you think you'd be interested in, and go and try and get some experience, either shadowing or in an internship. Join as many clubs as you can. I know that we have mock trial and pre-law society at Bellarmine, so definitely get involved in those. And pick a major that you love, because with law school you can major in whatever you want in undergrad, and it's very important to get your GPA as high as possible. And I think the easiest way to do that is when you're in a major that you love and you love your classes, because it's going to be that much easier to get better grades.
Exactly. And you can go, I guess, where can you see it on Bellarmine's page? Like the club organization, is that on one? Engage. So yeah, if you go to Engage Bellarmine, they'll have all that down there listed and how to join. But thank you all for joining in today, and we'll see you next week.